Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Scene X. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our chilling content. Tonight, we're delving into 3 creepy night shift horror stories. Sit back and enjoy. Night shifts at the Supercenter were always a peculiar experience for me, filled with the scent of cardboard, plastic wrap, and the dull glow of overhead lights. The store, bustling with activity during the day, would transform into an echoing cavern where the sounds of our footsteps were amplified and shadows danced in the aisles. I had been working the night shift for 6 months, and I had become accustomed to the solitude and the eerie silence that settled over the massive retail space after hours. But tonight, things would be different. My usual partner for the night shift was Mark, a quiet guy in his 30s who seemed content to stay in his world, listening to his favorite podcasts with his headphones on. We rarely talked, but our routine was synchronized, each of us understanding our roles and tasks. The store had a way of swallowing noises, and with Mark's constant use of headphones, I often felt as if I were the only person in the building. The colors of the products, the distinct shapes of the packaging, and the way the shelves aligned, it all added to the monotonous rhythm of our work. This particular night began no differently than the others. The store was bathed in an artificial white glow, and the scent of cleaning products still lingered in the air from the janitor's recent work. Mark and I started on aisle 7, the canned goods section. I could hear the faint sound of his music playing from his earbuds as we silently stocked the shelves. Hours drifted by, and I became absorbed in the repetitive motions, lulled into a sort of trance by the sounds of tearing cardboard and the clink of cans. My thoughts wandered, comforted by the normalcy of the evening. But then, a noise, soft and distant at first, broke through the monotony. A creaking sound, followed by a thud, echoed down one of the far-off aisles. I paused, straining to hear, but all I could make out was the faint music from Mark's headphones and the distant hum of the refrigerators. I dismissed it as nothing, a product of my tired mind, and continued my work. But the noise persisted, growing louder, more deliberate. A series of thumps, a scraping sound, then silence. My heart began to pound, and a cold sweat broke out on my brow. Something was wrong. I glanced at Mark, but he was oblivious, lost in his music, carefully placing cans on the shelves. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sense of dread continued to grow, gnawing at me, pulling me away from the routine. I decided to investigate. I crept down the aisle, my ears straining to pick up any sound. The store was quiet, the air still, but I could feel something in the pit of my stomach, a tension that told me something was amiss. The noises led me to the electronics section, a high-ticket area filled with the latest gadgets and gizmos. I peered around the corner, my heart in my throat, and that's when I saw him. A man, dressed all in black, was rifling through the shelves, his movements hurried and furtive. He was here to steal, and I had stumbled upon him. I turned to rush back and tell Mark to call the security, but I slipped, my foot catching on something, and I went sprawling to the floor with a crash. The robber turned, his eyes wide, and our gazes met. Time seemed to freeze as we stared at each other, a million thoughts racing through my mind. I had to get away, had to warn Mark, and had to call for help. But it was too late. The man charged at me, a flash of metal in his hand, and pain exploded across my body. Pain shot through my body as I hit the ground, my vision blurring, my mind spinning. The man was on top of me, his hand over my mouth, his eyes wild with panic and rage. "Shut up," he hissed, pressing the knife against my throat. "Don't scream, don't move, or I'll slit your throat right here." I could smell his breath, rancid and filled with the stench of cigarettes, feel the sweat on his brow as he looked around wildly, making sure we were alone. He was rough, his grip tight, and I could feel the cold steel of the knife as it pressed against my skin, threatening to cut, to end my life in a flash. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, my body trembling with fear. He let go of my mouth but kept the knife to my throat. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't try anything stupid, I'll kill you. I swear I will." He moved quickly then, grabbing a bag and stuffing it with merchandise, his eyes darting around, always watching, always aware. I lay on the floor, my body aching, blood oozing from the wound on my arm, terror gripping my soul. The minutes dragged on, each second an eternity as the man worked, his movements frantic, his breath ragged. I thought of Mark, oblivious to what was happening, lost in his music, his world. Would he even notice if I died here? Would he ever know what had happened? I thought of my family, my friends, my life, all of it flashing before my eyes, all of it slipping away. Finally, the man was done. He turned to leave, but then he paused, looking down at me, his eyes cold, his face unreadable. "You saw my face," he said, his voice low, filled with menace. "You know what I look like. You know what I've done." He raised the knife, the blade glinting in the dim light, and my heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. He was going to kill me. He was going to end my life right here, right now. But then he hesitated, his eyes flickering, his hand trembling. "I should kill you," he whispered, his voice filled with doubt, with fear. "I should make sure you never talk, never tell anyone." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of humanity, a glimmer of doubt. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking, my tears flowing freely. "Please don't kill me. I won't tell anyone, I swear, just let me go." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine, his mind working, and then he lowered the knife, his hand shaking. "Go," he said, his voice soft, filled with uncertainty. "Go and never speak of this. Never tell anyone, or I'll find you. I'll kill you." He turned and ran, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone, broken and terrified. I crawled to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. I stumbled down the aisle, each step a struggle, each breath a battle. I found Mark, still lost in his music, still oblivious to the horror that had just unfolded. "Mark!" I screamed, my voice filled with desperation. "Mark, help me, please!" He looked up, his eyes wide, his face pale, and he pulled out his earbuds, rushing to my side. "What happened?" he stammered, his voice filled with shock, his hands trembling. "What's going on? Are you okay?" I fell into his arms, my strength failing, my vision fading. Call for help," I whispered, my voice barely audible, my body giving way. "Please, Mark, call for help." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, his voice filled with panic, and he dialed 911, his words tumbling out, his fear palpable. I closed my eyes, my body going limp, my mind drifting. I could hear the sirens in the distance, growing louder, coming closer, but they seemed far away, distant, unreal. The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent, their movements quick, and they worked on me, their hands skilled, their faces determined. The ride to the hospital was a blur, the lights flashing, the sirens wailing, the world spinning. I remember the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that I had come so close to death, so close to losing everything. But I survived. I lived to tell the tale, to share my story, to warn others of the danger that lurks in the shadows, the evil that hides in plain sight. I'll never forget that night, never forget the terror, the pain, the desperation. I'll never forget the man, his eyes cold, his heart dark, his soul twisted. I'll never forget the lesson I learned, the truth I discovered, the reality I faced. Life is fragile, precious, fleeting, and sometimes in the blink of an eye, it can all be taken away. Working the night shift at Bella's Diner was a lesson in routine. The sounds, the smells, the sights, they all merged into a continuous loop, like a record playing the same track over and over again. From the hiss of the grill to the clink of cutlery, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the constant buzz of the neon sign hanging outside, everything felt familiar and predictable. My colleague Sarah was the other half of the late-night duo. She was around my age, in her mid-20s, with an easy laugh and a talent for turning even the most mundane task into a fun challenge. Together, we managed the place from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., serving truckers, insomniacs, and partygoers looking for a late-night snack. The diner's retro interior was filled with colors from a bygone era: chrome accents, red vinyl seats, black and white checkered floors. During our shifts, the lighting was dimmed, casting a soft yellow glow that made the place feel cozy and timeless. But tonight, something felt off. It started with a bad feeling in my stomach, a prickling sensation that made me glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. The diner was nearly empty, with just a couple at the far end of the counter, lost in conversation. I shook off the feeling and continued to wipe down the tables, the smell of cleaning solution mixing with the lingering aroma of fried onions and coffee. Sarah was at the grill, flipping burgers and humming a tune. I watched her for a moment, appreciating the normalcy of the scene, trying to push away the unease that had settled in my chest. The door chimed, and I turned to see a new customer walking in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black hoodie and jeans. His face was hidden by a dark mask, and his eyes, cold and unfeeling, locked onto mine. A chill ran through me, and I instinctively took a step back, my heart pounding in my ears. "Can I help you?" I managed to stammer, my voice sounding weak and distant. He didn't respond, just continued to stare, his gaze unwavering and intense. I could feel sweat forming on my brow, the fear growing with each passing second. The man finally moved, taking a seat at the counter, his movements deliberate and controlled. He kept his head down, his face hidden, the hood pulled low. I looked over at Sarah, hoping she had noticed something amiss, but she was focused on the grill, oblivious to the tension that had filled the room. Swallowing hard, I approached the man, trying to shake off the fear and act normal. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea?" He didn't look up, just muttered, "Coffee, black." I poured the coffee, my hands trembling, the dark liquid splashing into the white mug. The smell was strong and comforting, a reminder of normalcy in a situation that felt anything but. I set the mug in front of him, trying not to make eye contact, but I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and unrelenting. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The couple at the end of the counter paid their bill and left, their laughter a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had settled over the diner. It was just Sarah, the masked man, and me. I tried to go about my tasks, pretending that everything was fine, but the fear wouldn't leave me. I kept glancing at the man, watching him sip his coffee, his face hidden, his intentions unclear. The clock on the wall seemed to mock me, its ticking a constant reminder that time was moving slowly, that we were trapped in this nightmare, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, it did. The man finished his coffee, setting the mug down with a deliberate thud that echoed through the diner. The sound jolted me, and I looked over to see him staring at me again, those cold eyes filled with something unreadable. He reached into his pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to pull out a weapon. Instead, he took out a crumpled bill and tossed it on the counter. "Another," he said, his voice raspy and low. I poured him another cup, my hands shaking so badly that I spilled some on the counter. The smell of hot, freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the lingering scent of grilled meat and my own rising panic. He watched me, his eyes never leaving mine as I cleaned up the spill. There was something predatory in his gaze, something that made me feel like prey. The night wore on, the hours crawling by. The man stayed at the counter, ordering coffee after coffee, watching me, waiting. Finally, near the end of our shift, the man stood up. My heart leaped into my throat, and I watched as he walked slowly towards the cash register. Sarah looked up, smiling. "Can I help you, sir?" He didn't answer, just reached into his pocket and pulled out a gun. The world stopped. The sounds of the diner faded away, replaced by the deafening roar of my own heartbeat. Sarah's face went white, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Open the register," the man growled, his voice filled with menace. "Now!" Sarah fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. "Please don't hurt us," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Take the money, just don't hurt us." The man grabbed the cash, stuffing it into his pockets, his eyes never leaving mine. And then, without warning, he lashed out, hitting Sarah across the face with the butt of his gun. She screamed and fell to the floor, blood pouring from a gash on her forehead. I rushed to her side, my mind reeling, the world spinning out of control. The man ran, the door slamming behind him, leaving me alone with Sarah, the smell of blood and fear filling the air. The next hours were a blur of sirens, police, and paramedics. I answered their questions, told them everything I could remember, but it all felt unreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sarah was taken to the hospital. I sat in the waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights adding to the surreal quality of the night. I thought about the man, his cold eyes, his calculated movements, the way he had watched me, waited, struck. The fear he had instilled in me was something I knew I would never forget. The robbery had been about more than money. It had been about power, control, terror. I realized then that the diner, with its checkered floors and red vinyl seats, would never be the same for me. The smells, the sounds, the sights, they were all tainted now, twisted into something dark and terrifying. The night shift at Bella's diner had been a lesson in routine, but it had also been a lesson in fear. I knew then that I would never work the night shift again. My name is Sarah James, and I manage Grilltown, a fast food place nestled in the outskirts of Dallas. The restaurant, with its vibrant red and yellow sign, stands as a 24/7 beacon for travelers and nocturnal citizens. Night shifts are my specialty. The glowing fluorescent lights cast elongated shadows that creep across the tile floors, while the air smells of frying oil and well-seasoned beef. Shapes of burgers and fries adorn the walls, and their cartoonish appearance provides a strange comfort in the silence of the night. It was on one of these mundane nights that my life changed forever. I was alone as usual. The buzzing sound of the refrigerator in the kitchen was my only companion. I found solace in the routine tasks, making sure everything was perfect and ready for the morning shift. The night had been uneventful until the clock struck 2:47 a.m. The sudden ping of the drive-through alert system jolted me from my reverie. A car, beaten and rusted, with one flickering headlight, pulled up to the order window. Inside was a man I'd never seen before. His eyes were wild and glassy, his hair disheveled, and his clothes torn and stained. His voice was ragged, as he muttered something about a burger and fries. I couldn't quite place his accent. It was foreign but familiar. I took his order, trying not to let my unease show. He kept staring at me, his eyes unblinking, as though he was seeing right through me. A cold chill ran through me as I handed him his food. His hand brushed against mine, and I almost recoiled from the shock of it. His skin was cold and clammy, his grip too firm. As he drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I locked the doors and tried to return to my duties, but the image of his strange, haunted eyes lingered in my mind. The next few hours crawled by, each tick of the clock echoing in the empty restaurant. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somehow the man's presence still lingered. I checked the doors and windows, peered into the dark parking lot, but saw nothing. Finally, as the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, the morning crew arrived. Relief washed over me, and I eagerly handed over my duties, grateful to leave the unsettling memories of the night behind. My drive home was uneventful, but the memory of the strange man still weighed on me. My small apartment, usually a refuge, felt cold and unwelcoming. The smell of my lavender air freshener did nothing to calm my nerves. I showered quickly, hoping to wash away the fear, and crawled into bed. As I settled under the soft blue covers, my mind began to drift, the tension of the night slowly easing. I was on the edge of sleep when I heard it, a faint scratching sound, distant but distinct, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, the lingering effects of the night's encounter. But the sound persisted, growing louder, closer. The sound of shattering glass froze me in terror. I lay motionless, every muscle taut, listening to the soft crunching of footsteps on the broken shards. The sound was coming from the living room, growing louder and closer with each passing second. My mind raced, panic and disbelief warring within me. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare, a terrible dream from which I would soon wake. But the footsteps were real, the danger palpable, and I knew that I had to act. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. My eyes darted to the window, but it was too high, the drop too far. My only escape was the front door, but to reach it, I would have to cross the path of the intruder. I crept toward the bedroom door, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear him now, moving through the apartment, his breath heavy and labored, the soft rustle of his clothes as he searched for me. The smell of his sweat and something else, something foul and rotten, drifted into the room, filling my nostrils, making me gag. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling, my mind screaming at me to run, to flee, to escape. But I knew that I had to be quiet, that I had to be careful, that any noise could give me away. I eased the door open, a sliver at a time, peering into the dark hallway beyond. The intruder was in the kitchen now, his silhouette visible through the open doorway, his movements deliberate and predatory. He was searching for me, hunting me, and I knew that I had only seconds to escape. I stepped into the hallway, my body tense, my ears straining for any sign that he had heard me. The floor creaked beneath my feet, the sound impossibly loud in the silence, and I froze, terror washing over me. He had heard me. I saw his head snap around, his eyes narrowing, his body tensing. And then he was moving, rushing toward me, his face twisted in rage and madness. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and primal. I turned and ran, my feet pounding on the floor, my only thought to escape, to get away, to survive. He was behind me, his breath hot on my neck, his hands reaching for me, his fingers brushing against my skin. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and I screamed, a high-pitched wail of pure terror. I twisted, my body thrashing in a futile attempt to escape, and then I was falling. Time seemed to slow as I tumbled to the floor, my head striking the wall, stars exploding in my vision. A framed picture hung nearby, a cherished memory of happier times, came crashing down beside me. The glass shattered on impact, the sound sharp and piercing, fragments scattering across the floor. I felt a searing pain as a shard of glass sliced into my arm, blood welling from the wound, warm and sticky. I looked up, my vision blurred, my mind reeling, and saw him looming over me, his face a mask of rage and triumph. "No!" I screamed, my voice hoarse, my body moving on pure instinct. I kicked out, my foot connecting with his knee, and he stumbled, his grip loosening. I scrambled to my feet, my arm throbbing, my head spinning, and lunged for the door. I could hear him behind me, his curses filling the air, his footsteps heavy and unrelenting. I reached the door, my fingers slick with blood, fumbling with the lock. The terror, a living thing inside me, driving me, pushing me. I threw open the door and stumbled into the night, the cold air sharp in my lungs, the darkness engulfing me. I heard him roar in frustration, heard the door slam shut, and I knew that I had escaped, that I was free. I made it to my neighbor's house, bloodied and terror-stricken. They called the police, and I was rushed to the hospital. I spent the following weeks in a haze of pain and fear, knowing that the man who had attacked me was still out there, knowing that he had never been caught. The police did everything they could, but the trail went cold, the clues leading nowhere. The man had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the terror he had inflicted. The scars from that night will never fully heal, both physical and emotional. The memory of the man's eyes, the sound of his voice, the cold grip of his hand, these things will haunt me forever. I will never feel safe again, never know peace. The shadows of that night will always linger, a constant reminder of the evil that lurks in the most unexpected places. I will always be looking over my shoulder, always wondering if he is still out there, watching, waiting, ready to strike again. For the nightmare is never truly over, the terror never truly gone. The man is still out there somewhere, and I know that I will never be free. Thanks for watching.